Here we have one of the new Fender Pro Reverb amps. It's not really a Pro Reverb, or Pro Reverb is a 2x12. This is one of the new 1x12 single channels. The true Pro Reverb also has the other channels. So this is probably going to be a pretty popular model that I've not had before. And the complaint is that there is a low level hum. So let's start with the volumes off and turn all the tone controls to noon. Noon on a Fender is 5.5, between 5 and 6. It's not actually at 5 because it starts at 1, not at 0. Reverb off, speed intensity off. Let's power it on in standby. I'm going to speed up the time here. Okay, it's magically a minute later. Let's power it on, out of standby. And I don't hear a low-level hum at this point. I hear hiss. This with the volume off. A real Pro Reverb with the volume off would be silent. If they do the same thing on this one that they do with the other 68 Custom series, that hiss is normal. It's a very noisy circuit. I've not seen what's inside this one yet. Let's see if the reverb's the cause of any hum. There's not an abnormal amount of hum there, more than is optimal, but there is some hum there. And on the volume, in addition to the hiss, there is a good amount of hum. That could just be a preamp tube or something. Switch needs to be cleaned a little bit. All right, let's turn this thing around. Pretty typical construction these days. Oh, that tube cage is really loose. Let's tighten that up while we have it easily accessible here. All right, it's got the G12 Neo speaker, so that would be cool to check that out. I've not heard the speaker before. I've only heard the C12K Neo, or whatever they call it, which sounds awful, just like the full regular C12K sounds. But I like the creamback regular speakers that Celestion makes. Let's see how the G12 Neo does. Let's take the rear panel off. That's weird. It's got a cage here above the power transformer. This groove tube labeled JJ is very microphonic. This one's not. That could be a cause of hum if this tube's operating differently. And that's a lot of microphonics in a power tube. That should be silent, but that's going to vibrate with notes. Let's see the reverb driver there. Tube is just barely hanging on. And not the tube, but this shield. Let's take the shields off. Let's bring the volume up. All right, no issue with microphonics on any of the tubes. That's good. I turn the volume back up. Yeah, cutting it out. We'll move the mic closer, maybe you can hear it. So one of the biggest things you can do for yourself if you have any of the Fender reissues is either replace or have replaced this plastic molded speaker cable, because it will begin to fail, and once it fails, you can't fix it because it's all in the plastic. It just doesn't make good contact. Let's power this off and pull it from the chassis and take a look inside. Before pulling the chassis on any Fender reissue amp, I like to check for daylight, because the adhesive-backed metal foil that's on the top of underneath the top side of the cabinet often sticks to the chassis, and if you just pull it out, you get shreds of aluminum. This one's pretty good as far as passing the daylight test, except here in this, if you're looking from the front, it'd be the front right corner. Here it's on the left. So I'm going to take a inexpensive butter knife. Notice the amp is not plugged in. And I'm just going to help it out. Let's get this started. Hard to do from this side, but I can't really see. And there I feel it, so I'm just going to push up. I'm using a flat knife. It doesn't have any edge. I'm not using any serrations. Just pressing it up against the cabinet, helping it out. Run it the whole length, make sure there's no resistance. And now I can pull the chassis out without tearing that foil. Okay, nothing is visibly bad. I've looked through the whole thing to suss out what they're doing, and a few things to point out. First, let me remove this little snippet of wire that's been in here since it was built, just floating around. That's never a good thing to have in a live chassis. Couple of things. The mids pot on this is a 25K linear. So if you want it to sound like noon on an actual Pro Reverb or noon on a twin, you want to have it just barely over 2. And if you want to have it sound like a deluxe reverb, you want to have it just barely over 4. And beyond that, you just get into lots of boost. And that's fine, it's subjective, but noon on this is a lot more mids than any Fender from the 60s or 70s ever had. Second of all, like most reissues, the solder joints for the pots and switches are a little suspect looking. I'm going to tighten all the switches and see if I need to tighten the pots, and then look at the solder joints. Interestingly, I'm not sure what the negative feedback resistor is. It's right there. I don't do color codes very well. But across it and across this resistor, which is the resistor from the phase inverter tail to ground, I'm measuring 44 ohms, which is probably nominally a 47 ohm resistor. Most, in fact, all Fenders that used this phase inverter with a pair of 6L6s in the 60s and 70s used 100 ohms there. So I suspect that they are deviating from the classic phase inverter component selection. The rest of it's 470 and 22K and 1 megs, the way you expect. Let's tighten up some stuff. I like to make sure that the power transformer is tight on these things. You can't see what I'm doing here. I'm just a little bit off camera, because they almost never are. And indeed, they were not. Real quick, check that output transformer. I believe that's what I'm looking at. Let's see. Where'd my screwdriver go? I'll check the other side on that as well. As you can see, this model has a solid state rectifier, and it has this inline filtering and current limiting. Kind of takes the place, kind of, sort of a rectifier tube. No big deal there. Let's check the tightness of those jacks while we're in the neighborhood. Not the jacks. Yeah, the jacks. Sorry. I keep want to call jacks plugs and switches and stuff. So not too bad. Of note, they have a dual switch thing. So if you use the one speaker, the internal speaker, or just that by itself, you get an 8 ohm tap. If you use both, it goes to a 4 ohm tap. Let's check at least the tightness of the volume pot. Pretty good. Not as tight as I would like. I'll do all the others in just a moment, because that's easy. Most of the reissue Fenders have bright switches. The bright switch is free floating from the board and accessible for cleaning. This one on this model is not. There are a lot of there's some odd little things. There's a diode across this cathode bypass cap. You can't really see it. I'll move the camera. Here you can see it. It's a little odd thing to do. There's a little cap across the output jack. Also seems a little bit odd. Maybe they're worried about oscillation because they have decreased the negative feedback. I don't have the schematic for this model. Probably won't need it for this repair. If I really needed to, I could take this board out and draw it all out what they're doing, and then I'd know the secrets. I don't think it's necessary here. Right now, one other thing I want to check before I call the owner. Here on the reverb driver socket, they have the mistake that most reissues have, which can give you that increase in hum in the reverb compared to a vintage model, and that the plate connection, this blue wire, is crossing over the tube, going over here from 6 to 1, and the cathode from 8 to 3 is crossing, And the grid connection comes here at 7 and loops around to 2. Now, I'm not even sure why it is, but it is demonstrably the case that if you rewire this like the originals from the 60s and 70s were wired, where the grid also crosses the triode, from 7 to 2, directly across, but then you move the loop to the plate connection, so the plate connection actually loops around, it significantly decreases hum most of the time. I'm not quite sure why that would be the case, but it is, and it's a simple thing to do. So I will let the owner know that I can do that, which will help with the hum and the reverb. The only really thing that stands out to me as not working as designed is that Microphonic 6L6. Everything else does exactly what it was designed to do, which is to have more mids, more gain, more noise floor, less classic sound. I'd be glad to go in here and reflow the input jacks, maybe the volume and reverb pots that get turned the most, et cetera, et cetera. And, it depends on how wonderful he wants it. The only way to make this thing sound as good as an average example from the, say, 68 or so, 66, would be to pull the board and undo a lot of the 68 custom nonsense that they have. And one thing I'm going to look into in just a moment is how they're doing the phase inverter input. On the original, the output of each channel was fed to the phase inverter input via two 220K resistors. And those resistors also act as a voltage divider, which lowers the level of each channel slightly. Lots of times when people build a one-channel Fender like this, they don't understand that that was one of the functions of those mix resistors. And so the amp ends up having a good bit more gain than it really should. So when you do a single channel Fender, if you want it to sound like the old one, you need to create a voltage divider there, which gives you that same drop. Otherwise, you have a lot more gain. Now, that may be one of the things that they intentionally did on this circuit. I will find out. But typically, the 68 Custom series, the Princeton, the Deluxe, now this alleged Pro, would-be Pro, they're noisy as a result. They're really noisy. They're not at all what Fender and Don Randall and the guys dreamt up. So let me see what I find next, and let me call the owner. Well, I spoke to the owner, and he had to go into a gig, so he's going to call me back. But the gist of it is, while this amp does need a new speaker cable, because that molded plastic is kind of crappy, and it, in theory, needs a new pair of 6L6s, because this one's really microphonic, and in the combo, that'll be a problem. The rest of it has the exact noise floor that you'd expect from the 68 Custom series. I could improve the hum and the reverb, but even up, at 3, 4, it's not too bad. And I said, basically the problem is that I can make this amp sound much, much better, but it would no longer be a 68 Custom. Or, since this thing's practically brand new, you could sell this, trade this, and let me help you find a better amp for your needs, because these things are designed to be noisy. Just in general, any of the Fender reissue series, the 65s are good choices. The 68s, there's one heck of an asterisk. If you absolutely love that gain monster sound, it's there, but there's a trade-off, and it comes in the form of noise. So let me let you hear for a little bit. I did some initial playing before I started recording here. It tends to be very, very bright. So I'm going to start off with the treble and bass at noon, and the mids about 2.5, which is where you'd find it on a twin. Then I'll turn the mids up a little bit to where it'd be on a deluxe. Then I'll put the mids up around noon, and I'll turn the treble down so it's a little less harsh. I don't think that's the Neo speaker. I'm kind of impressed by the Neo speaker from what I can tell using it with this amp. I might try some other amps here through it while I've got the chance. But I'm not sure if anything's going to be done to this amp. It may be better for the owner just to say, okay, yeah, that amp's got too many issues. I don't want to throw more money at it. Let's get something better for my needs. Anyway, let me get some sounds here. So there's nothing there that's objectionable, really, aside from that higher necessary noise floor. When you have the amp about 4.5, 5, which is where I started, the breakup to me is not very Fender-like as far as something which says Pro Reverb. But, some people are going to like that. I found the mids get pretty congested once you get them up to noon. But, from 1 to 4.5, they're usable. I think it's a fairly narrow range. The reverb sounds good. There's that hum in the reverb, but that'll go away if I were to make some changes. But it's livable as is. The main issue is that rattly 6L6 here, and it was vibrating until I just did that. So that's definitely needs to be changed out. And the other main issue, of course, like most reissues, even the 65s, even this includes the Hot Rods and Blues series as well, that molded plastic speaker plug / cable combination is just crap. So I don't know whether I'm going to do anything with this amp on my bench, but I'm glad I got a chance to see this new model. So when people ask what I think, I can actually have an opinion. I think it doesn't quite do what it says on the tin.